It is summertime, and I know a lot of people have been on vacation, and then some of us are not on vacation. So I thought, well, today let's do something a little bit different. So if it is your first time here, you'll know, I just want you to know it's not how we always do it here. But anyway, as I was thinking about today's message, it is the fourth Sunday we've been talking about prosperity. And I asked myself, why is it so hard to talk about prosperity? Why does it seem like we have to go over and over it and before we can grasp this concept that we live in an abundant universe? It's a matter of accepting our good. And we're also in the midst of the unexpected income program, and if you didn't get a chance to sign up because you were on vacation, we have these forms in the back on the table, and you can just fill it out, and actually inside, it's actually a prayer treatment request form for people to fill out and put in the prayer treatment box. That's all it takes to sign up. And we're doing the program anyway for everyone who signs up, so feel free to sign up. Because our whole thing with this program, yes, it's great to have more money in our lives, but the underlying idea is that this is simply another effort to actually convince ourselves that we live in an abundant universe, that we actually can make progress in our efforts to not just attract, but to accept more good into our lives. So I know that everyone already understands that the word prosperity is not just limited to money or things. Beyond our finances, we define prosperity as having the ability to do what you want to do when you want to do it. So it helps to think of prosperity as talking about financial freedom, but also freedom in general. When you're prosperous, you feel free to live the life of your choosing. So in recent weeks, we've been giving some tips and ideas about how to allow good into our lives in the form of prosperity, but it's hard sometimes. You hear the idea, but how do you really let it flow into your life? So I started thinking about logjams, right? So logjam is when, I guess they still have them, maybe some, but anyway, in the days when timbering was so much more widespread across, especially the Northwest, they would cut the trees down and trim them into lengths, and then they would take them down from the mountains into the rivers, and then the lumber these tree trunks basically, would flow down the river, and it wasn't that unusual to get a log jam where there'd be some reason why everything would get stopped up. Nothing would be able to flow, and it would be a big problem to get the logs moving again because they're just all jammed up together. So there was no motion. And so I think, for me, I just thought about it. I thought, well, this is like a metaphor for what happens sometimes in our minds when, despite all we know intellectually about our ability to live in a state of abundant good, it still seems hard to accomplish. Usually, when I talk about the obstacles to living in accordance with our principles and how we can have these little thoughts that interfere. I usually talk about, chatter, the kind of mindless chatter, or talk about the monkey mind, how you just kind of, you think you're doing one thing, but in the background there's just all this jumble of thoughts. But well, logjam is it's like, okay, I'm blocked. And stop. There are things in my life that I am blocked. And so that's kind of how I was thinking about prosperity in my own life. There are certain things. Honestly, it's not, for me, it's not so much about money. It's a little more about clutter and declutter. I'm blocked, I have to admit it. So that is a logjam. And so I just wanted to, think about that and kind of say to you, this is the logjam that I'm thinking about. Whatever your particular dilemma is that you're facing, whether it's monetary or some other aspect of your life, if it's something where you have felt hopeful, and then you felt patient, and then you felt frustrated, and then you felt discouraged. This is what I'm talking about. That's the logjam I'm talking about. So, now I want to share a story with you. That's kind of like, so I was setting the stage. Now I'm going to share a story. Now, this version of the story was collected by the Brothers Grimm over 200 years ago. But the story itself, the basic concept in the story, is something that has popped up in different cultures all over the world for thousands of years. Because like so many fairy tales, there's a certain universal idea to it. So here we go. By the side of a wood, a long, long time ago, in a country far, far away, ran a fine stream of water. And upon the stream there stood a mill, a place where they grind grain into flour. The miller's house was close by, and the miller, you must know, had a very beautiful daughter. She was, moreover, very shrewd and clever, and the miller was so proud of her that one day he told the king of the land, who used to come and hunt in the wood, that his daughter could spin gold out of straw. Well, this king was very fond of money. And so when he heard the miller's boast, his greediness was raised, and he sent for the girl to be brought to him. Then he led her to a chamber in his palace where there was a great pile of straw. And he gave her a spinning wheel, and he said, "Oh, this must be spun into gold before morning if you love your life." So it was in vain that the poor maiden said, well, it was only a silly boast of her father, for she couldn't do that at all. She didn't know how to spin straw into gold. But the chamber door was locked, and she was left alone. So she sat down in one corner of the room and began to cry and bewail her hard fate, when all of a sudden the door opened and an odd-looking little man hobbled in and said, "Good morrow to you, my good lass. What are you weeping for?" "Alas," said she, "I must spin the straw into gold, and I know not how." "What will you give me," said the little hobgoblin, "to do it for you?" "My necklace," replied the maiden. So he took her at her word and sat himself down to the wheel and whistled and sang, round about, to and behold, reel away, straw into gold." And round about the wheel went merrily, the work was quickly done, and the straw was all spun into gold. When the king came the next morning and saw this, he was very astonished and pleased, but his heart grew still more greedy. And so he shut up the poor miller's daughter once again with a fresh task and another pile of straw. And once again, she didn't know what to do, and she sat down once again and started weeping. But the little hobgoblin soon opened the door and said, "What will you give me to do your task?" "The ring on my finger," she said. So her little friend took the ring and began to work at the wheel again and whistled and sang, round about, lo and behold, reel away, straw into gold. Till long before morning, all was done. The king was greatly delighted to see all this glittering treasure, but still he didn't have enough. So he took the miller's daughter to an even bigger room full of even more straw and said, all this must be spun tonight, and if it is, you shall be my queen. As soon as she was alone, the little man came in and said, what will you give me to spin this straw into gold for you for the third time? I have nothing left, she said. Then say you will give me the first little child that you have when you are queen. Well, that might never even happen, said the miller's daughter to herself. And she didn't know any other way to get the task done, so she agreed to do what he asked. Round went the wheel again to the old song, and the little man once more sang and spun the straw into gold. And the next morning, the king came in, discovered everything had been done, and kept his word, and made the miller's daughter his wife, and she really did become queen. Well, later, at the birth of her first little child, she was so happy, and by that time she had forgotten all about her promise to the little hobgoblin. But one day, he came into her room where she was sitting, playing with the baby, and reminded her of it. Then she was so sad at her misfortune, and she said she would give him all the wealth of her kingdom if only he would let her off. But it was in vain. But finally, she cried so much her tears softened him. And so he said, well, I will give you 3 days grace. And if during that time you can tell me my name, you shall keep your child. So the queen lay awake all night, thinking of all the odd names that she had ever heard, and she sent messengers all over the land to find out new names. And the next day, when the little man came, she began with Timothy, Ichabod, Benjamin, Jeremiah, and all the names she could remember. But to each one that she named, the little man said, Madam, that is not my name. So the second day, she began with all the funny names she could think of, Bandy Legs, Hunchback, and so on. But the little hobgoblin still said to every one of them, Madam, that is not my name. Well, the third day, one of the messengers came back and said, I traveled 2 whole days without hearing of any other names. But yesterday, as I was climbing a high hill among the trees of the forest, I saw a little hut. And in front of that hut, there was a fire burning. And around the fire, a funny little man was dancing on one leg and singing, merrily the feast I'll make, tomorrow I'll brew, tomorrow bake, merrily I'll dance and sing, for next day will a stranger bring. Little does my lady dream that Rumpelstiltskin is my name. When the queen heard this, she jumped for joy. And as soon as her little friend came, the hobgoblin, she sat down upon her throne and she called all her court around to enjoy the fun. The nurse stood right next to her holding the baby as if it was going to be given up. And the little man began to laugh at the thought of having the little poor child to take home with him to his hut in the woods. And he cried out, "Now, lady, what is my name?" "Is it John?" she said. "No, madam." "Is it Tom?" "No, madam." "Is it Jemmy?" "No, it is not." "Can your name be Rumpelstiltskin?" "Some witch must have told you that, some witch told you that," cried the little man, and dashed his right foot, stomped his right foot in such a rage, so deep into the floor that he was forced to lay hold of his foot with both his hands to pull it back up out of the floor. Then he made the best of his way off, while the nurse and all the people laughed, while the baby crowed and cooed, and all the court laughed at him for having had so much trouble for nothing, and said, "We wish you a very good morning and a merry feast, Mr. Rumpelstiltskin." That's the end of the story. You might be wondering why I told that story. Well, it's obviously a prosperity story, right? Turning straw into gold. And when we share a folk tale with a child, there is no need to discuss the meaning of the story. No, we just let them make of it whatever they will. Whatever makes sense to them, whatever they think about it, know that as time goes on, their understanding will grow. But today I thought maybe we could use this story kind of like a little faceted mirror. If you've ever seen those little feng shui mirrors or Indian mirrors where they have so many little pieces of mirror glued to something in a shape. And just imagine that each character in the story mirrors a facet in our own psyche, in our own mind. So one of the many possible ways to look at the story of Rumpelstiltskin is to think of it as a timeless story about how we create and then solve dilemmas or problems. Because at the beginning of the story, there was nothing going wrong. Miller had a nice business, the daughter was doing whatever she was doing, the king was having a hunt, everyone was fine. Everything was fine. But somehow this dilemma got created where this topic of turning straw into gold actually put the life of the miller's daughter and the life of the little prince at risk. So from nothing, all of a sudden, there was a big problem. If you start with the miller, because he kind of started things off in the wrong way, right? Why on earth would he have put his daughter's life at risk just to make a good impression on the king who was just riding by? Did it ever even occur to him what would happen if he said something like that of what might happen to his daughter? Well, this is how I was thinking about the mind chatter, or the monkey mind, or in his case, way worse. He completely, I believe, we could say that he completely was so tuned into his silly idea about making a good impression, looking like a success, hoping that, some miracle and, his daughter would have a good life, that he just blurted out the lie about spinning straw into gold without even thinking about the repercussions at all. Have you ever said or done something without thinking it through? I know I have, right? But then once he did, this mindless, thoughtless blurting out set into motion a whole crazy and dangerous chain of consequences. I mean, who would have guessed that the king would be so greedy that he would treat the miller's daughter with such recklessness? Who would guess that? What was the king thinking? So to me, when I think about the king, because it's like, wow, that was a really mean king. And yet, in another way, you can think of the king as just being the material world. The world grinds away in an impersonal way. So yes, in the beginning, he takes advantage of the miller's daughter out of greed, but that was actually an impersonal type of greed. He didn't have anything against the girl. Work or die, he said. That's kind of how sometimes it seems like the world is. Certainly when this fairy tale was written in the old country, in the rural areas, work or die was the story of people's lives. But if you think of the king as a person and not just representing kind of this materialism, you could say that he was very insensitive because of his personal greed, which blinded him to his possibility for real happiness. And then, of course, there's the miller's daughter. So I think the miller's daughter, she's the main character of the story to me, because think about it. She was the one who was supposed to turn this straw into gold. So, facing her dilemma of her father's wrong-headed impulses, the king's cold calculations, there she was, desperate. Of course she gave away all she had to save her life. And of course, without thinking it through, she even promised to give away that thing that would be most precious to her someday, her child, her future. And if you think about it, was that any different than what her father had done to her? Give away his future, his child. She was a victim. She felt like a victim. She acted like a victim. And her life unfolded through this without much thought on her own part, besides how to scrape through the situation day to day. And then, of course, there was Rumpelstiltskin, who was a very magical, odd figure, you know. So let's just say he had an amazing talent. A lot of us have amazing talents. He had this amazing talent, and he kept it hidden, just like he kept himself hidden. So, looking at the story from a metaphysical point of view, I could say he seems to represent a very unloved and lonely feeling. You know, being kind of like a grouchy old hermit. And yet, wasn't it he who showed up at exactly the right time to save the princess from her death? But then, instead of being kind and helping out of the goodness of his heart, he tried to take something precious from her in exchange for what he did. Now, if you think about the story and you wanted to turn it into a new thought story, you know, or cooperative type of a story, you'd say, oh, if he was so lonely, why did he bargain that if he turned the straw into gold, that he could have the queen and the king build a little house for him right in the middle of the palace? And then he could have been part of the community and his loneliness would have gone away. No, instead he had this other plan, which of course loneliness attracts loneliness, which was he could basically steal the baby and then he would have a companion out in his little hut all by himself. So he played out his own logjam in his own mind of being unloved and unlucky, which in the end guaranteed that instead of being a hero, he was a laughingstock. So the logjams, as I see it in all the characters' minds, influenced their thoughts and their actions, so that together all of them created the stoppage of good unfolding. And to me, of course, the baby could be seen to represent good unfolding, the future unfolding. All these dilemmas caused by mental blockages, selfishness, and in the miller's daughter's case, our chief character, by a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness. She simply went along to get along. But then what happened? When everything looked so bleak, when Rumpelstiltskin actually showed up to take the baby, she woke up. She woke up from her state of dreamy acquiescence. She woke up like a sleeping beauty, or like I'm sure each one of you has done when a certain situation became so unbearable that it just woke you up. She woke up. She came to her senses. She made a new decision not to give in to Rumpelstiltskin's demand. The story basically says, well, she renegotiated. And isn't that what we teach? When you change your thinking, everything changes. She got a new deal. The new deal came about because of her new thought about the situation she was in. She made a decision to stand up for her good, for her future, and then, because of that, suddenly she knew what to do. She called upon her helpers, her community, her friends, her neighbors. She sent them out as messengers to help her solve the dilemma. She didn't have to do it all alone. So, do you begin to see parts of yourself in each character? Do you begin to see how indecision or poor decisions based on what's not true can get us into some jams of our own making? And also that this story, it's an adventure story. It's a hard luck story. It's a good luck story. But underneath it all, it's urging us subconsciously to live sensibly, to be awake to what's going on, to not just cause problems without thinking. Because all the problems in the story were caused by misguided thinking. And all the problems in the story were solved by clear thinking. Knowing the name, the simple name of Rumpelstiltskin, caused everything, the whole situation, all the problems, to melt away as though they had never been there at all. Except, you could also say that the whole story ends in a great healing for everyone. I would say even for Rumpelstiltskin, because he was blocked from doing great harm. So mistakes were made by everyone, yet in the end something changed. The path of disaster was changed. The dilemma melted away. The logjam of too many mixed up and false ideas broke loose. And so that today is my story about how each one of us, metaphorically speaking, can turn our own straw into gold. How we can each, metaphorically speaking, shift from a state of financial fear into a state of financial freedom, brought about by clear thinking and a willingness to find clear avenues, pathways financial freedom, shifting into financial freedom, shifting into a state of increasing excellent health, shifting into a state of feeling no longer lonely, but feeling and treasuring the relationships that we do have, our community. Rumpelstiltskin is a story about how we can turn our back on the unwanted conditions we face by waking up, seeing what's really going on, and then making new decisions based on new thoughts that usher in new days and new ways of living. And so it is.
Yes, it is.